if you don't address the spending, you're still going to have the problem down the road. You can do the tax cuts and you can have revenue triggers and you can go that route if you want to. But in a couple of years, when you have a revenue shortfall, you're going to be in trouble. When you have that revenue shortfall, then you're going to have to decide, are we raising taxes or are we cutting spending? You know what I mean? So the better way to do it is to just limit the growth of spending from the first place. So then you don't have to end up in that place and have a really, really difficult decision to make.
Hello, welcome again to another episode in the Let Fuel Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I have a great guest on who we're going to talk a lot about South Carolina policy, but we're going to discuss how South Carolina compares with other states around, what it's working on, and other things. And it's none other than Sam Aaron. Sam, welcome to the Let Fuel Prosper show.
Yeah, great to be here.
Good. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. We've been friends now for a while and spent some time up in South Carolina with you. And I was like, hey, let's go ahead and have you on the show, talk about what's happening there. There's a lot of exciting things, some things that still need to be worked on. So why not? Before we hit the ground running, let me go ahead and read your bio for the audience. So Sam Aaron is the research director of the South Carolina Policy Council and one of the sharpest fiscal minds working in the states today. A native South Carolinian with a deep-rooted passion for his state and its people, Sam has been instrumental in advancing taxpayer victory since joining SCPC in 2022. I've had the pleasure of working closely with him for years, especially on the responsible South Carolina budget, which provides a clear roadmap for sustainable spending and pro-growth tax reform. More recently, we've been partnering on lowering South Carolina's income taxes and hopefully eliminating them altogether through responsible budgeting. Beyond tax and budget work, Sam has authored major policy reports, including the Roadmap to Universal School Choice, How South Carolina Can Tackle ESG, and an in-depth analysis of regulatory and liability reform. Sam holds a BA in political science from the University of South Carolina and brings a clear, focused approach to every project aimed at expanding freedom and opportunity across the Palmetto State. So, with all that great stuff going on, Sam, let me go and ask you the question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
Yeah, well, like the bio says, I'm from the state of South Carolina. I grew up here. I went to high school here. I went to college here. I met my wife here. I love this state. And I think that as, kind of a Republican stronghold, so to speak, a conservative stronghold state in the country, I think that we're not doing enough to lead the union. I think that there could be a lot more done and we could really be on like the cutting edge of public policy. And I think that, the state government, to the extent that it should exist to serve the people that live in the state. So since I'm from here and I care about the state a lot and care about the people from here, that's kind of what gets me up out of bed in the morning. Yeah,
man, I love it. And soon you'll be having a child. And so you'll also have kids that you're bringing up into South Carolina as well, right?
That's right.
Yeah. That's exciting, man.
We're really excited. Me and my beautiful wife, Lindsay, are very excited.
Yeah, me too. I'm so excited for y'all and hope all that goes well and everything. And I wonder, you've got your great background there in South Carolina and you want to help people and where you live and where your family is going to grow and things of that nature. What kind of got you excited about freedom and free markets and kind of down that direction? What really got you going? Was this someone that you read or what was it?
Yeah, well, this honestly wasn't the path that I saw myself on whenever, I was growing up. And when I was in high school, I was really into journalism. I liked video broadcast journalism a lot. And, I also wrote for my high school newspaper and I really enjoyed that. And that was also the same time that President Trump was kind of like rising to power, right? And I can kind of remember in 2015, after the South Carolina Greenville Republican primary, reading about this and watching some of the news coverage of it. And it wasn't matching what I was seeing. And that kind of, made me really reconsider the way that I was looking at things. And I've always been a guy who's very interested in history. So, there's not a whole lot that you can do with a history degree, but there's even less you can do with a political science degree. You can go to law school and that's about it, So, I started off as kind of a gen ed student and then found that I really enjoyed political science and really enjoyed learning about, public policy initiatives in state government and federal government. So that's kind of what made me get into it. And then once you kind of get into understanding how it all works, you understand how bad everything is, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, like the state, the federal government, it just exists to kind of get in the way of everybody. So I think that if you're, if you do a little digging and kind of understand the way that the process works and kind of understand how public policy is pushed forward, then you understand, like, we need to get this stuff out of the way. We need to deregulate. We need to let people do what they do, let the economy function as it should, and just go hands off and not try and centralize power. So that's kind of, where I get my kind of political philosophy, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I like it, right? Because it's kind of experience. You got to college, you saw things going on in high school and kind of the political dynamics that were going on, and you felt something's just not right. And you may not have had all the pieces together yet, and I don't think we still do, right? We're still working on all this stuff, a work in progress, if you will. But there's always something to learn along the way, and I'm glad that you went into public policy. We need more people that are bright and looking forward to the future. Too often, it seems like people that get into public policy, they end up thinking that government is the solution. Many economists, I'm an economist, and many who get a PhD in economics, they go down this route of saying, well, if we could just change the wheels, move this knob of this machine of an economy, we can get the outputs we want. But that's not who people are. We're dynamic. We work together. We look at transactions and interactions among individuals within all these institutions. And so it's very dynamic and complex that you can't just simplify and say, okay, this is what we're going to have these people do. And it becomes too controlling. And that's why we see socialism fail and communism fail and all these other things. And so I think you're really heading on a right track there of seeing these things that just don't quite make sense. But how can we move forward? I wonder, have you read much of Thomas Sowell or Milton Friedman or some of those folks through your studies?
Yeah, I'm a Friedman fan. I think he's one of the great libertarian minds. I'm a big fan of the pencil essay. I think that especially with like the younger generation coming up, they don't have enough respect. I would consider myself part of that kind of younger generation of people. I think that people around my age, they don't have enough respect for just how much work market economies do and how much good they actually provide for everyone across the world. And I think that pencil essay does a really good job of articulating that. Nobody knows how to make a pencil is like the end conclusion, and it doesn't work unless you have, all these different people specializing in skill sets and, participating in trade with one another.
Yeah. I wish more people would go out and read that essay. I think Leonard Read was the first one that put it out at the Foundation for Economic Education at FEE. And then Milton Friedman, really popularized it in a lot of ways too. And Milton Friedman's my favorite economist. I have a lot of other ones, Thomas Sowell and Frederick Hayek and others. But I think the way that he was able to express things with clarity that people could understand just set him apart from many of the other economists that were out there at the time. And even today, I think I still watch some of his YouTube videos, and so it's just to see the presentation and what's going on, and it brings it to life. And I think something else that you hit on, though, that I like to follow up on is it does seem like the younger generations, I'm 43 now, I'm right at the cusp of the millennials. In 1981 is when I was born. And but it seems like there's this view of the younger generations to not care as much about economics, that they kind of push it off to the side. In fact, in Texas, they've removed economics as being a requirement in high school. They put in personal financial planning, and that's a Republican state making this sort of decision. But I'm concerned because there are so many economic factors. We're going to talk a lot about South Carolina, but if you look at the nation, we got $37 trillion in national debt. We're still running close to 3% in inflation. We've got, all these other problems that seem to be happening that oftentimes are created by government, and yet they want to find solutions by government. And if you come in and you make a bad cake and you put icing on the bad cake, it's still a bad cake. And unfortunately, I feel like we're overlooking some of those problems and trying to come up with solutions. Do you find that, though, within the younger generation and in your own work, about how you see things from maybe there's a change in the paradigm of how people see things, but also see the policy and how maybe it's contributing to these problems?
Yeah, sure. I think that also, it's just been a little bit of a shift from the political shift recently, even your Republicans now are kind of, they're a fan of these like populist things, some of which I like, some of which I don't like. But it used to be a philosophical argument between like centralized control and like pure libertarianism, right? And that's not really the argument anymore. Now we're talking about what level of control should be articulated. And I think that I know friends. I have friends that, don't agree with me at all on these things. And I just don't understand how they arrive at the conclusions that they present. I mean, when you think about like the government trying to control the economy, the government can't even give me my sticker for my license plate to show that I paid my property taxes. I mean, like, they can't even give me that on time. So, like, why do I think that they're going to be able to control, interstate commerce and all sorts of these economic decisions that, like, even economists don't think they can control, So why would some politicians up in DC have the ability to do that? It just baffles the mind. I try to understand it, but I really just don't.
Yeah. Well, if you ever figure it out, let me know, because I'm still trying to figure it out as well, Sam. I want to really dig into South Carolina. There's been a lot of things happening there. I mean, more people are moving to South Carolina. There's this abundant sort of a thought and a push out there. There's also a lot of competition. You've got North Carolina that's also pushing in the right direction on tax reform and things of that nature. Georgia and some other states. And so this system of federalism, which I think is a beautiful part of America that kind of sets us apart, is allowing for this laboratory of competition to be in states and having them run things well. I want to get into sustainable budgeting here in a minute, because you and I have been working, or responsible budgeting in South Carolina, which we've been working on a lot. But I want to just take a little bit of a step back from more of a 10,000 foot, even higher foot. What do you think about South Carolina that sets it apart, maybe from other states, humbly, that you think about sets it apart, but also allows for challenges and optimism that you see in South Carolina?
Yeah, I think that the first thing, these past couple of years, South Carolina's been right up there on the U-Haul reports. More people are coming to the state in droves year after year, which is, it's great. I think that probably what led that was the whole COVID situation, right? South Carolina they had a couple of issues off the jump and then kind of straightened up and flew right. So they made good decisions on that front, and that led to a rise in population. And then on top of that, the low cost of living in this state, it's very, very, very reasonable, in context with, your Californias and your New Yorks and whatnot. Other than that, I would also say, there's a lot of areas around here. I sound like a real estate broker right now. There's a lot of up and coming areas down here. Like South Carolina's got a lot of really cool, diverse areas. We've got, the upstate in Greenville with some mountains. And then we've got the capital city of Columbia with my alma mater, the University of South Carolina, a nice college town. We've got Charleston and Myrtle Beach with all the nice, the ocean and whatnot. So I think it's a really diverse state. And specifically if you live towards the center of the state, it's 2 hours to get to the mountains. It's 2 hours to get to the beach. I mean, that's pretty good. And I think that's pretty attractive for a lot of people. So I think those are some of the main things.
Yeah, definitely. It has been interesting too, Sam, to see what's happened since COVID and how people are moving around. People move with their feet. Who would have thought? Incentives matter. It's, some of the basic economic stuff's coming to light. And I think that's where, with so much competition that's happening among the states. I mean, there are 8 states without a personal income tax. I'm in Texas where there's not an income tax, which is great. We have to work on our property taxes, which we are. But there's also, I think there's about 14 states that are moving to zero income taxes soon. And there are more that have, or 14 that are flat or moving to zero soon. And so that's going to get us close to half. That could be either very low and flat or being zero. That's going to add a lot more competition to the system. And sure, people don't move just because of income taxes. I mean, I get that. I remember, this is crazy, but I remember Paul Krugman, the economist, the left-wing economist who used to write for the New York Times. He would always say people move to Texas because of the weather. And I'm like, have you been to Texas? I mean, during the summer, it's hot. And there's other things that are going on, but there's other things going on than taxes and fiscal policy. But I think it does play a role, right? If you have incentives and people want to work and keep more of their money, which who doesn't want to do that, at least keep their own money, you want to go to places where you can have more money in your pocket. And yes, you have, I mean, you started you were born and raised in South Carolina, so you've got family and friends. It's very difficult to move. And so it's something that I've been looking at a lot, Sam, and talking to folks like you, is to try to figure out, like, why the heck are people moving? And have you talked to many people in South Carolina to figure out, like, okay, why they're moving there or have other ideas?
It's interesting that you raised that point, because there was actually just a piece in, I want to say like the Washington Post, but one of the media outlets, the national media outlets, of a person who was talking about moving from New York to South Carolina, and they basically said, like, sure, the cost of living's low, and sure, the tax burdens are low, but there's all those religious folks down there, and it's not all it's cracked up to be. And the response from a lot of South Carolinians was like, yeah, don't come down here, which I thought was really funny. But no, I think that you're right on the mark. I think that, taxes probably isn't going to be the end all be all, right? Like you probably want to live in a nice area. You want to be able to find the home that meets all of your qualifications. But, if you find two places and one of them, all things else equal, and one of them has no income tax and the other one does have an income tax, it's obviously going to be a factor. I mean, it'd be crazy if it wasn't. I think that the state is just kind of becoming more and more popular because, relatively speaking, to some of these like larger, more liberal areas, we do have a relatively low tax. Our taxes are at like 6% ish. Floating around there. We're trying to get that down further. So relatively comparing that to some of these other states, that looks good. But then when you compare it to like our neighbors, and South Carolina is pretty close to Florida and Tennessee, and that it's a tough pitch whenever those are the options.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, let's go ahead and start digging in some of the policies and other work that you've been working on. A big one that you and I have been working on together is the Responsible South Carolina Budget, and one that it kind of follows the model of trying to use Colorado's Taxpayer Bill of Rights sort of idea. TABOR is what it's called there, of population growth plus inflation as a metric to look at what the growth rate is over time of spending, to really try to rein in the spending over time. And that way you can have more tax relief and other things. And I wonder, kind of, since you've been working on this, what do you kind of find are the pros and cons, and other ways that you like to explain it to people in South Carolina, and maybe what you've been hearing from the political class, the legislators and things of that nature, on maybe where things are heading with the budget?
Sure. I think that from most lawmakers, when you say we'd like for you to cut your budget, they're not very interested in that, right? They obviously like allocating money, but they want to spend money, but they also want to promise these tax cuts for everybody and say, see, we're competing, we're getting rid of our income tax. And I think that just, we're right there. And I think that they're realizing that, these two things can't go together. You can't increase your spending exponentially and then also promise tax cuts in the same breath. So that's been the most important thing, I would say, is getting that message through of, no, as Milton Friedman says, the government spending is the tax. You have to pay it back. You know what I mean? It's got to be paid for somewhere. And when our budget over the past 25 years has gone up, it's more than tripled. You're not going to have a lot of tax cuts. That's been the most difficult thing for me, anyways, to try and make that case that no, the spending's the issue. And the argument that is rebutted or the argument that I always hear back is, well, we just need more revenue. We're just going to keep increasing revenue, and we'll just increase revenue exponentially, and then we'll outgrow our spending issue. And I think you can look at the federal government and see that doesn't work. The only result that brings is, a devaluing of your currency. So then your money is worth less, and massive inflation, and then, just deficits that are completely out of control. I don't want that to happen in my state, and that it won't happen quite necessarily in that way. We have a constitutionally mandated balanced budget. But the point being is, we've had a surplus these past, I don't know, 5-ish years. Why do you keep increasing the spending? You should, if you left it the same, we could use all that surplus to, cut the income tax in half.
Yes, exactly. And we've shown some of that in our research, is that if they would have spent just limited to population plus inflation, there would have been billions of dollars available for tax relief over time, which would be tremendous. And, I think it is tough, right, to come in and say, okay, politicians, you're not going to be able to spend as much. You're not going to be able to buy as many votes. You're going to have to ignore some of the rent seekers and the lobbyists that are coming in and saying that you need to spend it on X, Y, and Z. I mean, it's got to be tough being in those positions, right? To say, okay, I need to get it reelected because I have X, Y, and Z that I really want to get done, while at the same time keeping my principles close. And what I see politically, right, and from the public choice sort of economics, James Buchanan, a good economist there, talked about the rent seeking that happens, is that people in the private sector tend to be purposeful with their behavior. They act in their own self-interest because they want other people to trade with them and things of that nature, but also get what's best for them. And some people, it seems, Sam, think that, well, politicians in government are angels. And if we had angels if we were all angels, we wouldn't need politicians. We wouldn't need government, by the way. But they're not angels either, that they too work in their own self-interest, but it's a different marginal cost and marginal benefits. In the private sector, we work off of profitability, budget constraints, things of that nature. There, they have some budget constraints, but they also have the incentive to be reelected. And if they don't do certain things, then they won't be reelected. Therefore, they can't keep their position in doing the other things that they would like to fulfill within their journey. But that means that there can be problems when you see fiscal conservatives, for example, will oftentimes choose to spend more, maybe because it's against their principle, but it's to get reelected. And I remember something else, speaking of Milton Friedman, he always tried to say, we want the incentives in place for the wrong people to do the right thing. And that's very difficult because all of us are wrong people. We're all fallible in some capacity. So how do we get us to do the right thing? And I think that's one way that the responsible South Carolina budget is really trying to help guide them in a direction without big cuts, right, Sam? I mean, that's what we'll hear is like, you got to make these big cuts. We're actually not even talking about cutting the budget. That would be great. But we're just saying slower the growth rate. That's different than saying cuts to the budget, because then you can start doing, zero-based budgeting. You can do priority-based budgeting, other things that are prioritizing the taxpayer money. What do you think about that, and how do you like to build on it?
Yeah, I think that part of being a politician is you have to make difficult decisions. That is the whole gig, is that you have to weigh the trade-offs and figure out what's going to benefit the people of the state and what you're representing the most. And I think it's a lot easier to just continue to spend more than to actually make the hard decisions and figure out what you need to maybe spend a little less on, or maybe this state agencies, it's not really pulling its weight. It's not doing what the initial purpose was. Maybe we don't need it anymore, and we're spending a lot of money on it. I think that's the task of a lawmaker, but it comes at a political cost. Everybody gets mad at the guy who says, like, we need to cut spending, but they all know it's true. And yeah, we've moved the goalpost substantially on our end. The call used to be, we need to cut spending. Then it was, we need to not increase spending. Now it's like, we can increase spending, but only by a metric that's reasonable. And it is you're looked at like a radical if you say this thing, but it's the most reasonable position in the world. You know what I mean? You should have to justify why we're going to increase spending substantially. I shouldn't have to justify why we're only increasing it by this reasonable metric. And I think that's the hardest pitch is encouraging politicians to, govern with some conviction and say, you know what, we don't need to blow out the budget on this agency this year because, they had a renovated building last year. We don't need to renovate another one,
Yep. And what's been interesting too, Sam, is kind of this Doge effort that Elon Musk and Trump kind of, championed there. And we could debate whether or not a lot has been done at DC yet, but at least they're starting to do something. But we've also seen this pop up in states and everything. And I was wondering there in South Carolina, what have you seen as part of the Doge effort or anything else along those lines?
Yeah, there's been a couple of proposals filed. I know there's one that passed the Senate on the last day of session, we have a 2-year legislative cycle, so the last day of the first half of the session. So that's still got a chance. I think that it's great that people are talking about limited government because, for the longest time, it felt like conservatives and Republicans just kind of abandoned this point. And it's a pretty good pitch, like we don't need the government to be that big. That's a very, it's an easy idea to communicate, and more people should know that and think about that and be like, yeah, maybe they're right. Maybe we don't need it this big. And I think that in our state anyways, we have existing, I believe, 4 or 5 different kind of entities that do this already at the state level. So like the question that I propose to lawmakers on the subject, and I'm not even like shooting it down because like I said, in principle, I agree with the idea of an entity that says like, let's cut spending here and here. I love that. I love that concept. But you have to explain to me how it's different from the 4 existing bureaucracies. Right. I'm not for just creating another agency when we've already got 3 that kind of do similar things. In South Carolina, we have a group that's called the Legislative Audit Council, and they respond kind of to our House Government Efficiency Committee, and they do these like lengthy reports. And they do great work. It's a relatively small staff. They audited our Department of Transportation one time and issued this was in 2017, put out like a 300-page report about, you say you fix roads worst to first. You're not actually doing that. It's costing everyone more money. You need to make these structural changes to make it, more easily accountable. So they came forward with all these great, recommendations. And I was speaking with a gentleman who works there, and I said, so out of all of your recommendations for the General Assembly and the Department of Transportation, how many of them went into effect? And he was like, based off of my counting, none. Oh. So it's like, we've got this great organization that already does this stuff. So why don't we give it some teeth? I mean, like the committee needs to be doing its job in enforcing the recommendations that are proposed.
Yes. Oh man, that's a great point. Oftentimes they'll want to meet or have committee just to have a committee or just to say they did something. That way they can go back to the voters and say, look what we did. And even in DC, I mean, DOGE, they were able to cut a lot of contracts, which I think is good. Some federal workforce decided to resign and things of that nature, I think was good. But and that will help with spending over time because you don't have as much compounding, right, over time. But the only amount that they could put in a rescissions package, which means you claw it back, was $9 billion, which they barely passed. They almost didn't pass it, Sam, at $9 billion, even when we're running $2 trillion a year in deficits. And so it kind of can tell you that there's a major problem with all this. And, it's been interesting, too, for I'm a classical liberal, probably more on the libertarian side overall, but I just want government out of the way. But on the classical liberal sort of spectrum, if you think about it in that capacity, libertarians and conservatives kind of all live within that sort of mentality to a certain extent. But it has been interesting in the last, decade where, and probably more than that really, but you've seen it to where conservatives have tripped up on some of this, where they'll want to spend more and not cut and then cut taxes as well. And I think there's some truth to the supply side economics in the sense of if you cut taxes, there will be more incentives to act. But I don't believe that they just pay for themselves overnight if you keep spending going up at the same rate that it was before. And that's what we've happened in each one of the presidential sort of tax cut efforts. When you go back to JFK, Ronald Reagan, George W. Bush, the first Trump administration, they ran up massive deficits. I like the tax cuts, but the spending was out of control. Sam, the last president that really, I think, restrained spending and ran surpluses was, they did some of that during Clinton, but it was really Calvin Coolidge a century ago, to where we really had that sort of restraint. I wish we could see that again, because that's really what we need. And for the states, to your point earlier, okay, states are different. They don't have a Fed that could just print money. which is good. Right. We don't need any more feds. We don't even need the Fed we have, but regardless. And then you look at, they also have balanced budgets. 49 of the 50 states have a balanced budget rule or requirement in place. I think it's 35 states have a spending limit of some type. So those are good. But if you think about the Sam Brownback era of the last decade, whenever they cut taxes in Kansas, but then they kept overspending, they ran deficits. And so what did they do? They raised taxes again. And it hurt Kansas. They're still feeling the effects of that. I work a lot with the Kansas Policy Institute. And so I think this is another good area to show caution for these lawmakers who don't want to rein in spending but want to cut taxes, is we have plenty of evidence that that sort of thing just doesn't work. And that's why I'm so excited about the work you're doing on this, is trying to look at, surplus triggers over revenue triggers. And I want to get kind of your thoughts on that. What have you been thinking about there?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple, I think. Like the decision a lawmaker has to make is pretty simple. It's like, what are we going to use to trigger these tax cuts? Are we going to use revenue, which is, for lack of a better term, it's basically arbitrary. Like, I mean, we come up with a random revenue number, and then we say, let's hit that. And then after we get over that, then we're good. Are we going to use revenue, which we can't control also? Right. You can't really control how much money's going to come in. You can have an idea. You can do this, like forecasting, but it's kind of a crapshot. You're hoping for the best, but if it's the worst, then what are you going to do? Because you got to balance it, right? And then the result is you have to increase taxes. So the better way to do it is to control the spending, because you can control that. I mean, the people on the Ways and Means Committee, bless their hearts, I understand that I want to believe that they understand this, but the way that they kind of act on these matters just shows otherwise, because the spending just keeps going up, I mean, and the population has grown, right? Inflation has also grown, but it's still a lot higher. You know what I mean? Like we're rapidly outpacing it. It's more than I want to say doubling. I'd have to check my math on that. But if you don't address the spending, you're still going to have the problem down the road. So you can do the tax cuts, and you can have the revenue triggers, and you can go that route if you want to, but in a couple of years, when you have a revenue shortfall, you're going to be in trouble. And when you have that revenue shortfall, then you're going to have to decide, are we raising taxes or are we cutting spending? You know what I mean? So the better way to do it is to just limit the growth of spending from the first place. So then you don't have to end up in that place and have a really, really difficult decision to make.
Yeah. You don't want that either, because then you change up the dynamics of how many businesses want to move to South Carolina, how many families want to. It puts a lot of uncertainty. And we already have enough of that coming out of D.C. right now with tariffs on and off again and all the other stuff that's happening. We don't need more of that. And one other point before we go into another topic is when you're thinking about spending, and we've talked about, okay, we're not really saying cuts. What I think this also does that's really important here, Sam, is it starts to force politicians to reconsider what their priorities are. Like sometimes, and I wonder what you think about this, Sam. Sometimes I am thinking about, I'm doing research and writing about all this, and I'm like, how much do we really need to get into the micro without explaining some of the theoretical reasons for why we're even talking about spending? Because spending is really setting up the policy priorities for the state. And if you look across all the areas that the government is, and this may be more my libertarian side coming out, I don't know the government should be doing half the crap it's doing. But yet, even if we increase it slower, they still don't like it. And so I almost think sometimes, Sam, that we've got to go back to like basic economics, basic principles, because I don't know that they quite understand it or getting it all together. I don't know. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you asked the lovely people over at the State House in South Carolina, like, how big of a government is too big of a government, they would tell you, I'll let you know when we get there, but I don't think we're ever going to get there. And I think that that's a huge problem. You know what I mean? I think that the state has kind of usurped all of these entities that used to perform the tasks, and now they're doing it. And, you look at virtually anything that is a good or service or whatever that the government provides. If there's a privatized version of it, it's typically a higher quality product and a better service. So, I mean, like, this just further, pushes that point that the government kind of sucks at everything. I mean, it drives me crazy when people think about like how good the government is at things. They think about like very odd niche things. They think about like, the Bureau of Economic Forecasting, right? They think about things like that. But what they need to think about is the DMV. When's the last time you went to the DMV and you were like, boy, this ship is running smooth? I mean, like things are really going well. And I can tell you the last time that happened for me, and it was never. I've never had a good time at the DMV. And, that is your government at work. That's what the DMV is.
Yep. No, that's a good one. All right. Well, let's go ahead and go to another big topic that you've been writing about. And I'll make sure to put all this in the show notes page as well. But is on school choice and the issue of trying to expand this for education savings accounts and making sure that students are best able to meet their unique needs by the parents and everything. And so what's been going on in South Carolina on the school choice front?
Yeah, so we had initially passed a school choice program in 23. We actually, tried to get one before that got struck down. And then in 23 had another one and that was struck down shortly thereafter. Our state has a Blaine amendment that says, no public money can go to private school. So that was like one of the big policy priorities come 2025, was reinstating this because there were, I want to say, at least 3,000 participants in the program in that first year that, it just got cut off. So that was one of the big issues that was in the crosshairs of lawmakers coming back. And respect to them, they took a long time to get a program out there. And I think the end result of the program is good. It's basically going to operate like a trust. You're going to have a real actual trustee who then oversees the administration of the account to the families, right? Who then allocate the money towards the school of their choice. So there is that degree of separation that in the dissenting opinion, in the initial program, this is what they said you have to do to make it work, right? So that's what they did. And, we've also had a bit of a shakeup in our South Carolina Supreme Court. The Chief Justice who oversaw the, unconstitutional, the ruling that the previous version was unconstitutional, he is no longer on the court. The gentleman who wrote the dissenting opinion of that is now the Chief Justice. So that tends to show me that you should get a better ruling this time around if it comes up, which I imagine it will come up very shortly. But school choice is very popular in this state. This program is bigger than the previous one. The first one, I want to say the cap was 6,000 students for the initial pilot year. This year, the cap is 10,000, and I'm fairly certain that they've already got 10,000 kids on there. That's going to increase to 15,000 next year. And then after that, it'll all be just based on funding. So in a sense, you're almost at the universal kind of standard. Now, there are still some income restrictions, which I think there's some work to do on that front. I'm a fan of the kind of accelerator model. Like philosophically, I think every parent should have the right to, withhold their money because they're paying the taxes, right? And then, send that to the school that they choose to send their child to. But in practice, I think it's very reasonable to have, a low income accelerator to give priority to lower income students. I think that's a fairly reasonable. But I think that if you're going to do the accelerator, then you shouldn't have the cap. You should delete the cap to just allow everybody to participate in the program.
Yeah. No, good points there, Sam. One of the things that I've seen in other states, including in Texas, we finally passed our first school choice bill this year. So that was good. There were some limitations to it, similar to what you were talking about there. But one of the things that has been concerning to me, and maybe it's just part of doing business with for politicians, is that they're plussing up or adding school choice money, but then they're giving a large amount to public schools, to the government school system. And in Texas, it was $1 billion for the school choice program, which is a lot. But remember, we've got 6.3 million kids. So the $1 billion is only going to cover about 90,000 kids out of the 6.3 million. That's 1.5% of the kids. But in doing so, they added $8.5 billion more to the government school system in order to basically, from my view, buy off a lot of the teachers. Now, the teachers still came out in force against it and everything, but I wonder if you've seen a similar sort of thing in South Carolina.
Well, like I said, our budget increases every year, and Department of Ed is no exception. And at the time, one of the big initiatives these past couple of years from Governor McMaster is increasing our teacher pay. So we have seen Department of Ed increase. I don't think it's quite as bad as what you're describing in Texas. I think that the increases are relatively reasonable.
Okay.
That being said, though, part of the pitch for a program like this is that it does save the state money.
Right.
Because, what it would cost the state $10,000 to do, they're giving someone $6,000 to go do it.
Yeah.
So they save $4,000, I mean, so if that's a part of the pitch, then I don't really see how you can kind of buy off the support. I also think, this is another one of these kind of like moments where your lawmakers have to act with political conviction, and they have to have some courage whenever they're pushing these things. And I think that when you do something like that, it kind of says like, I actually don't have the courage to stand up for this. I'm going to just kind of take the easy way, and I'm going to give a little here just to kind of shut everybody up, and then I'm going to do the other thing too.
Exactly. Exactly, man.
You got to make hard decisions. That's what the job is. So when you try and buy it off by doing that, it kind of undermines it. But that hasn't been quite as much of an issue here in our state anymore.
Okay. Good. And I liked your piece that you have out that I'll put in the show notes, and what you said earlier. I mean, I'm definitely more in favor of, one other problem that I think with funding so much with the government school system is that you have a monopoly. And if you feed the beast, if you feed the monopoly more while you're trying to add competition, the outcomes won't be as good as what we expect. It's just like any other system. When you fund or when you have the bigger one get even bigger and the other one's still staying small, it's tough to have that competition. But at least states are getting started in the right direction. I had Rob Enlow from Ed Choice on the show here recently, and they had a great paper on this Friedman Index. Speaking of Friedman, a lot of Friedman times coming in today. But he talked about, or they talk about in this report, having all funds. So that means dollar for dollar, to your point earlier, $10,000. If that's the government school amount, it's $10,000 for ESA. So all funds should be going, that all students should be included. So it should be for everyone without caps. And that you make sure that it covers like kind of all schooling. Like they can have all the options that are available. All options is, I think, is how they term it. And that's really the true universal school choice. And there are 5 states that they count as having that, like Arizona, I think Indiana, New Hampshire was the newest one. And that's 5 out of the 17 or 18 that have some ESA program now, or that have advanced those. And so it's interesting to see, because I hope at some point, Sam, that's where we can get to where everyone, all the parents, remember you said it good earlier, it's their money, it's taxpayer money. So why don't they have control over it? And if we have ESAs where every parent, no matter what their kid, how many kids they have those ESAs, they take their kids to whatever school they want to go to, including public schools. And then I think what that will do is not only bring about efficiencies within the system and reduce administrative costs, because there's more and more administrative costs, the more restrictions you have on a program, that you can actually get the students to the outcomes and the education that they need to receive, while at the same time helping teachers have more competition in the marketplace to go out and get a job and save taxpayers altogether. So I hope that that's ultimately where we end up, something more along those lines. But I think we've got a ways to get there, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And, I grew up going to a public school. I went to a public school, and I had a good experience at public school. But, the sad reality is that not a whole lot of kids are having that same experience. And when you look at, test scores and general satisfaction among like parents, it's not there. So you have to have this alternative avenue and actually provide people with choice. Now, I think a big part of that, which our proposal that was passed, it does a good job of requiring districts to establish a inter-district transfer policy. Okay. So you do have for lack of a better term, an open enrollment policy at the district level, which is great because, these schools that aren't meeting the mark, they have to, it sounds bad, but they kind of have to fail. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
There's no other way that you can make them come to the realization. It's like, it's not that if they had just another $1 million, everything would get better. That's clearly not been the solution when you look at, the constant spending, speed of which, for any of the Carolina people, North or South Carolina people, we have a report coming out with the Carolina Academic Leadership Network. My good friend Bryce Fidler, it's basically just examining academic achievement in South Carolina and North Carolina. And,
nice.
I covered the South Carolina portion, which, spoiler alert, it's gone downhill.
Okay.
It's over the past several years, COVID kind of exposed a little bit of the problems, but it wasn't the origination. Those problems existed very much before then. But back to the point, I think when you promote things like interdistrict and, beyond just the district, allowing people to just transfer to whatever school works, I think that's a really good way to allow competition in the marketplace to determine who succeeds and who doesn't. You have to let kids that are struggling in their environment, you have to let them try something else. If you keep them there in the failing system, then you're kind of just perpetuating the problem. It's not going to improve if you don't let them go elsewhere.
Yeah. Oh man, well put, Sam, as usual. All right, so we're wrapping up here now. What are some of the other big issues that you would want to talk about in South Carolina, or your work that you have going on now? I know you've been doing some ESG work and other things that are out there, but what are some of the other things that you're working on?
Yeah, well, the number one thing right now is obviously income tax, and it's looking like that's going to be the issue coming up in this new year here. Other than that, we have a judicial problem. The way that we pick judges in our state is very not good. There's a state house screening panel that has various different attorneys in the state on it, as well as lawmakers who are attorneys that are on it, that basically screen judicial candidates and give the governor a selection of a couple, and then he picks one of them. It's a problem. They need to reform it. This has been a question on the GOP primary, I want to say 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they asked about it, and overwhelmingly, it was like 95% of voters said, you got to do something about this. Yeah. They did a couple of things, but, the way that me and my colleagues called it was judicial enhancements. It wasn't reform. There's still more work to do. The way that we pick our judges, there's only one other state in the country that does it, and I believe it's Virginia. Now, I do not want to get to a place where we're like North Carolina and we're electing judges. I think that's like a really, really bad idea personally. Because then you're making your judges, kind of caught up in the political winds. And I think that's just a terrible idea. But I think the way the federal government does it is pretty good. You know what I mean? I think that you executive appoints, Senate confirms. That's it. That's all you need to do. So that's another issue that we're going to try and make some progress on this year. Yeah. Good. And we'll be working together some more on the responsible budgeting and income tax reduction and hopefully elimination, pretty soon. And there were some good steps this year heading in that direction in the House that I know you worked on a lot, and Michael and others there at the South Carolina Policy Council. And that next year when they come back in, we'll be pushing them again, right? That's right. And we definitely appreciate Michael's leadership on this stuff. Yes. He's new into the think tank space, and he's done a great job with the organization. So it's awesome. Y'all have a great group there, as you know, and I'm just excited for you and all the work you're doing, and the upcoming baby soon too, and hopefully that all goes well. But thank you for being on the Let People Prosper show, Sam, and God bless you and your family. Absolutely. Great. Well, it's a pleasure to have Sam on. For the audience, thank y'all for joining us today, learning a little bit more about South Carolina policy, but also policies for other states. If you're listening to this and you want to know how to get involved, go and check out the South Carolina Policy Council. Check out what some of the work they're doing and the research and everything. And I'll be able to put that in the show notes page as well. There's a lot of good stuff that's happening across the country, including there in South Carolina. And we need to make sure these reforms are spread out. That's one great thing about federalism. When you have these good policies, we need other states to do them. And so I think that'll be a big part of this. So
Thank you to the audience for joining me today. Remember, you can find all this information at vanceginn.com or go to my show notes page at vanceginn.substack.com and become a subscriber. And make sure to share it with your friends and family. They too need to learn what's going on. But until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.